10-minute daily reality check. Adam Gilad in the house.
Hey, man.
Hey, man. So I woke up this morning.
Yeah.
And whenever I wake up in the morning, I always wake up with a thought, a predominant thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, when I was sleeping this morning, only you can see this visual. Do you know I woke up this morning like this?
Like a...
With like this? Like Jesus,
on the cross.
right? Like Jesus on the cross. And I was thinking like, because my heart is wide open.
Yeah.
That's how I took it. Either
Yeah.
that or I'm fucking crucified, right?
Okay.
So-
Self-crucifying.
I thought about when we grew up.
Yeah.
The things that we got away with. And the first thing I said to you when I walked into the living room today was, "Hey, Archie!" Right? Do you remember he called...
Dingbat.
No, it was Dingbat. He called his wife Dingbat.
Yep.
He called
There's
Rob
like-
Reiner...
This is all in the family for those
Right.
of you who are
Called Rob Reiner Meathead.
meathead.
Okay?
Because he's a Polish meatball.
Right? And the Jeffersons... Remember the Jeffersons?
Indeed.
Did he call them... Did he use the word schwarze for them?
I remember what he called them.
I don't remember what he called them, but do you remember, like, when we grew up, the way blacks were portrayed on television?
Well, that was supposed to be a big jump, actually. That was Norman Lear trying to humanize and just tell the real story of black families instead of them just being sort of a sidekick or an anomaly or to use coloring in a show. You know, like the black character was always added color, always added some kind of, it's always the sidekick, the funny neighbor. And Norman Lear was one of the first ones to try to normalize or at least show black families or African-American families as just regular human beings like everybody else and not sidekicks.
It's so weird. And then the Jeffersons moved to the Upper East Side,
Yeah.
right? And that was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And do you remember Aunt Jemima? Mrs. Butterworth?
I'm afraid I do.
I mean, all that stuff was so over the top, so ridiculous. You wouldn't even, it was almost like they weren't people. You're right, they were just colored in caricatures, really. Caricatures.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was in those days. I mean, do you remember Soap, the TV show Soap?
I do. First gay character on
First
television.
gay character.
Billy Crystal.
Billy Crystal, right? And do you remember how offended his parents were for him being gay?
I don't.
Oh my God, it was unbelievable. And now, not only that, think about this. Think about when we played sports, right? When somebody fucked up. Somebody screwed up. Like you played basketball and the guy missed the basket at the end. You'd look at him and go, "What a faggot! You're such a faggot, right?"
You want to hear something crazy?
We didn't even think.
I didn't know what it was.
Neither did I.
We used the term. This is embarrassing. It's funny in a way, but I remember we used that term. That's so gay. I didn't know what gay was.
Neither did I.
When I was doing a school musical in high school, now commonly seen as a fairly gay thing to do. A lot of gay guys go into theater. We were doing West Side Story. Oh no, we were doing My Fair Lady, and this guy came over to me, and I was hanging up my sort of tuxedo pants from the formal dance from the show, and he looked at me and he goes, "You probably don't even know how to crease your pants, do you?" And I was like, "I don't. I wore jeans every day," and I didn't realize. And he, of course, turned out to be very gay, but I didn't know what gay was. We used the term, but I didn't know what it actually physically meant. I didn't know people did that back in the 70s.
They didn't. They didn't do any of that.
No, they
stuff.
did it, but I
They
just didn't
did.
know about it.
They did. Do you remember? There were gay jokes. Okay, how do you know if a man is gay? He's got to be. Why does a gay man have a mustache? It was to hide the stretch marks.
I don't even
I mean,
know. I
that
wouldn't
was
have known what that meant.
70s. I didn't know what any of that stuff
We were
meant.
very innocent in our
And
way.
it's so funny because where I grew up in Scarsdale, New York. There was one black girl, Maria Ouija Michelle. Her name was Ouija, and we all used to touch her hair.
It was Ouija?
We used to touch her hair because it was an afro, and we weren't used to that.
Wow.
There was no Chinese people. Okay,
No, they weren't invented yet.
They weren't invented
No.
yet.
I grew up
they didn't
across the
exist.
river from you in New York.
Well, they didn't exist. And my grandmother,
It was a restaurant.
my grandmother and grandfather used to call them Orientals.
Yeah, of course. No, my grandmother, speaking of grandmothers, my grandmother, growing up in the States, she moved, I think she was born here. People used to feel her head for horns. Like, actually, really, because she was Jewish. Not even kidding. I also remember, speaking of which, I remember growing up, there were restricted neighborhoods. Do you remember that term?
Yes.
Where Jewish people couldn't move into.
My grandmother lived in Flushing. Okay, she couldn't live in the town next to Flushing, whatever that was.
Wow.
Kew Gardens or something, whatever it might be, one of them, because the Jews were put in Flushing. Now, my grandmother moved out of Flushing because, as she put it, the chinks. That's what she called them, okay? She called them chinks, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't know what the fuck she was talking about.
Right.
She told me in 1979, she had to move down, or 78, she had to move to Florida. And there was only two places to move to Florida. She had to move to Sunrise or Boca, because that's where The Jews
were allowed,
right? Were allowed because the other towns in Fort Lauderdale and other places, the horns would have come out. They would have seen them. But my grandmother was the biggest bigot in the world. The word schwarze she used.
Sure, it was very common.
Google that. It was very common. Yeah. And I mean, I grew up, and it's so funny. I grew up. My mother always taught me everybody is the same, regardless of what color they are.
Me too.
So I never had racial prejudice. I never had any of this stuff. And I remember in the 80s, this is the 80s, I went down to South Carolina.
Yep.
And I was sitting around the table, and I was thinking of moving to Charleston, South Carolina. I was sitting there, and the one brother my age looked at me and goes, "You Yankee?" And I'm looking at him like, "I'm a Met fan."
I'm a Met fan.
I had no idea what he was talking about. I'm a Met fan. And then the grandmother goes, "Oh, God, yesterday was the scariest day of my life." And we all go, "Why?" She goes, "Well, I had a flat tire. And this colored person started walking towards the car, and I had color. I'm thinking like purple, red, Crayola crayons, yellow.
Times have changed. Right? When I went to college at the University of Virginia, I was with a girl who was from near West Virginia, and we were in bed and we were kind of kissing and all this stuff. No, she was very bright. I mean, University of Virginia, scholarship student. I said some word in Yiddish, and she goes, "What's that?" And I said, "It's Yiddish." And I remember she was underneath me. She looks up at me and she goes, "Oh, you a Jew person?"
Oh, a Jew
person? And I said, "Well, we prefer to be called Hebrewites." Seriously, that's what I said. She goes, "I'm sorry." And she was very nice about it. But she had never met anyone Jewish, and she was fascinated. So back in the day, before the internet, for those of you in your 20s who are listening, people didn't know about people that much.
No.
And even though we've got a long way to go, there was an article this morning about a father who killed his son at 14 because he's gay. That happened yesterday.
Oh, shit.
So we have a long way to go, folks. But it's interesting to sort of reflect on what was going on, 30, 40 years ago, because we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, it's amazing. We feel like we've come a long way, but we really haven't. But we've accepted. We've accepted and we've merged. Like I think it's a beautiful thing now when you see like mixed couples walking around. I mean, when you and I grew up,
no such thing.
No such thing. I mean, the whites were with the whites, the black. I mean, look, the blacks were like the greasers. Remember, we had greasers in high school. The greasers were the greasers.
Not only that, the Italian kids with the Italian kids, the Irish kids. Everyone grew up in their own circle when I grew up. Everyone had their own church, or people had their own circles. But now, of course, well, we live in California, so I don't know what it's like on the East Coast. In California, it's very culturally mixed.
It's very cultural.
People aren't hung up. I notice when I go back east, there's still like, Polish neighborhoods, Czech neighborhoods, like Chicago, places like that. And people identify with the old world, I think, more on the East Coast. Are there comments on this? Is there a place about comments underneath these podcasts?
Yeah, they can put comments underneath.
Yeah, what do you guys think out there? Is it different on the East Coast or Midwest? Are they more looking back toward their old world culture? Because I find in California, people are much more forward looking and less attached to the past, their ethnic past.
That's what I love about it, because I mean, being brought up to see no color, being brought up, and I've always had friends of all different. I've had the gay friends.
Well, we all see color.
I've had black friends. I've had white.
Right.
I've had purple friends. So when we get stoned and they eat a marble and they choke. But I mean, I've always been that person. I've always been that person that never saw it, because my mother made sure. It's interesting because my grandmother was a bigot, and my mother made sure that I never had that. And it is a generational thing. If you think of racism, it's very generational. You still go down south, and you still got the grandfather that's seriously believes that crazy shit that blacks are a lower form of human beings, and they teach their grandchildren.
Yeah, I don't believe in color blind. I don't think I don't see color. Of course, I see color. If I date someone who's mixed or black or Asian or Latina,
we see it, but we don't. There's no
prejudgment is the key thing. But I have to. Like, for example, I was recently seeing someone who, black father, white mother, beautiful woman, went to Yale, and we were dating. And for me to say I didn't see her color would be wrong, because it's a subject. We talked about it, what it was like growing up for her. It's part of who she is. So it's not that we don't see color. It's just that we don't make presumptions about people based on that. But we're curious about we have to be curious about what your experience is. Because if we make believe we don't see color, we're literally whitewashing people, and we're not taking their personal experience seriously.
It's interesting. It's like people still see things. Like, I'll get into conversations with people sometimes, and they'll talk about the problem with the Muslims.
Yeah.
The Muslims?
All of them?
I mean, like, and I'll literally say that. I go, wait a second, the problem with the Muslims, okay?
Right.
Are we talking about...
Well, it's like people talk about the Jews.
Right. Are we talking about the Muslims? Because they only have probably the largest amount of people in the world, you know? So we're talking about the Muslims, or we're talking about a few Muslims? And that's what I think a lot of people don't... They don't distinguish. They always... And people still go that direction.
Well, I really resent...
They go that direction of they have to group a bad apple. Somebody goes and they shoot a bunch of people, and then they talk about...
Unless they're white.
Right, unless they're white. Yeah. Well, what about the white guy in Las Vegas?
That's what I'm saying.
Seriously? Nobody
and
talked about the whites.
And Texas.
Right? Nobody talked about the whites. Nobody said, hey, you know...
These whites are dangerous.
Those fucking whites are dangerous, man. I'll tell you, those white people are dangerous.
You know,
Do you realize that tragedy was not talked about for more than maybe 3 or 4 days? It fucking got swept under the rug because it was a white guy. It was a grandpa.
No, if he was Muslim, the whole
country would have talked about it.
There'd be walls around New York.
Oh yeah, Trump would have built a wall around New York, around Texas, and everywhere else. And we got to keep the Muslims out of New York City, you know. But it's interesting because that alone showed that we still have a long way to go.
Well, the other way of looking at this, these are two very angry, dissociated white men. So as a woman, you're not only looking at them as white, these are angry white men who are armed.
It's interesting. It's interesting how we have evolved, yet we still need to evolve. And we can thank the internet for allowing us to evolve, because now...
In some ways, yeah, because we see each other.
Yeah, because there's countries we would have never gone to. You know, look at Colombia. You know, Colombia was full of the crazy Hispanics, right?
Colombia's amazing. I've been
Colombia's
there.
amazing now. It's one of the most beautiful, safe places to go. Remember, back in the 80s, Pablo Escobar, you didn't go. If you were a white person or an American person, you know, especially a white American person, you would be kidnapped. I mean, so the world has definitely grown and changed. But I think the big message that we're trying to get across today is just see a person for who they are. And be more aware of your stereotype generalizations.
Be willing to face them.
Right?
Be willing to face them.
Yeah, be willing to face them. When something happens in the news, what do you say to yourself? Do you go, oh, another black man did this, another Muslim did this, another white trash? You know, you can use that terminology.
Right. That's more acceptable.
You know, that's more acceptable. So the fact is, look at the way you react to things in your life and say to yourself, are you as open and as liberal and as free as you think you are, or do you still have some things to work through? Because there's something called generational programming, and you have generational programming from your grandparents and your mom and your dad and everything else, and you have an opportunity to really get rid of your generational programming. If you're going to go procreate, you can allow your children to live in a world that doesn't see or doesn't make judgments about things and sees things exactly for what they are. And that's your job as a parent, to really teach your child that the shit and the programming from your past doesn't need to go into their future gene pool.
Right. One of the nice things about the internet, and one of the nice things, and culture today, is that we encounter people from different cultures, societies, ethnicities, more than we used to. So you become real when you know each other, generally. So that's a big improvement.
Adam Gilad in the house. There'll probably be one more session with Adam in the house. Today's reality check was brought to you by Mrs. Butterworth and Aunt Jemima.
And Goldman Sachs.
And Goldman Sachs. Aunt Jemima has clearly asked me if there can just be a white and an Asian woman next to her on the box, and it could be the Aunt Jemima crew. Anyway, take a look at your racial stereotypes and really start to get rid of it.
Mrs. Soy Sauce, Mrs. Gefilte Fish.
How about Mrs. Gefilte Fish?
You can do a whole...
How about my favorite?
row.
Do you remember the Frito Bandito?
Oh, boy.
For all of you who don't know this, go to YouTube, put in the Frito Bandito, and realize how far we have become.
Oh, how about Speedy Gonzalez and Sloey Martinez? Or here's another one. Most people don't even know this. This is really scary. We all know Elmer Fudd. Type into YouTube, Black Elmer Fudd. He started out as a black racial stereotype.
Yes, I do know that.
Yeah.
I do know that.
Well,
I am the Frito Bandito.